This is the Heroic Voice, where I talk to comic book creators, people I've worked with, other interesting people, about the history of comics, superheroes, and the current state of the comic book industry. I also discuss current and upcoming projects, current events, and any other topics my guests might be interested in talking about. So subscribe and hit the like button. Help me grow this channel and promote indie comic book creators, publishers, and other people affiliated with the comic book industry. Your comments are appreciated. Get to it and leave feedback, good, bad, and otherwise. I am your host, Dennis Maloney, writer, publisher of the Heroic Multiverse, where we spotlight good girls, bad girls, super babes, and superheroics in a classic, kind of golden agey style. Grab some snacks and enjoy. This is the Heroic Voice. Welcome to the Heroic Voice. I'm here with the other Daerick Gröss, the son of our late departed friend. There's a story behind that. Let's do this, right? Your dad's name was not, in fact, Daerick Gröss. He
That is
stole
correct.
it. He stole it as a pen name when you were a baby.
That is correct.
Yeah.
So the joke was growing up, he ended up going by Daerick Gröss Sr. as a he started professionally as Daerick Gröss and then ended up adding the senior as I was a young lad getting more and more into art. And he realized like, oh my God, he might become an artist one day. So he started adding senior to the moniker. So the joke always is, he's Daerick Sr., but I'm Daerick the First. So,
Yes.
just kind of I would not ever have adopted the junior moniker. I had this will as a child. I was like, no, I will not be Daerick Jr., guys. I came first. No, his name is Richard. So, and growing up in the family, it was always, everybody calling him Rick. My mom called him Rick. His parents called him Rick.
I called him Rick.
Hmm?
I called him
Sorry?
Rick.
Oh,
I did.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, all his friends call him Rick. Daerick was his professional name, his pseudonym.
Yeah.
But as he went along in his career, more and more people knew him professionally. So more and more often he was also Daerick, which as a professional illustrator, certainly going back in earlier in my career was challenging too. Just, I would get his emails, he'd get mine. I get, we'd get fan art to sign cards and stuff for each other. It was just kind of interesting the conflation that would occur
And I
over the
just
years.
did that for heaven's sake. I sent you the link to this Zoom link to your dad's email address without
You
even
did.
thinking about it.
If he ends up joining though, more power to
Oh,
you. Thank
that
you. It'd be
that would
awesome
be
to see
great.
him again.
Yeah, I miss him. He was great.
I
Um,
miss him terribly.
yeah. So let's talk about you. You mentioned
Sure.
art, but you also told me you're not doing much in the way of art, but you're planning to get back into it.
So yeah, so let's go into me a little bit. So I went to school to be an artist illustrator. Spent oh my gosh, 15 plus years doing fantasy game art, commercial illustration. My dad and I got into studio together to do small press publications. That's the Studio G you see here. So yeah, I did all sorts of things, and then the life of a freelance artist is feast and famine, with a lot more famine than feast sometimes. And through the 90s and 2000s, I was a father of three small children. And at one point, it was just like, yeah, I got to get a real job. Like this isn't quite making it in order to, raise the family of five that we had at the time. So by the time we get to the mid 2000s, I ended up actually doing normal work, I guess. So I do illustrations here and there for the last 15 years or so. I still make myself known. But in the last couple of years, my dad and I were already coordinating on a couple of ideas, a couple of projects. And with his illness, his passing, everything now, the rest of the family and I, my sister and I, my daughters and nieces, we're all kind of trying to see what can we do with Studio G. We have the properties, we have the projects, we have a history, we have a legacy that we want to see fulfilled. So there are a couple of small irons in the cool fire that are warming up slowly. We don't have any big budgets. I still actually have a job. I've got two new little ones. So I've got, again, the children excuse. I got to be careful,
You're
where
a
I put all my
busy
time.
guy.
Well, you could say that. In any event, there are a couple projects. So where I'm putting attention right now are a couple of the things that my dad had left on the table. Um, uh, he had overall, he used this on Facebook a lot, but he had an area where he was doing a cartoon from the President Trump's first term. And, my father lampooned Trump a lot, not getting into politics one or the other. He is a political satirist in general. I can show you history across several presidents of both
Yeah.
parties where he just slams them. But in this case, he was definitely focused on making fun of Trump and had this strip called Trumpy. Um, Sometimes funny, sometimes not. But he had this character, he had this thing, and all the assets
Trump lends himself to humor deliberately.
he
He's a
does.
comedian, right?
Yes, whether you like the guy or not, he lends himself to comedy gold. Like there's all sorts of
Absolutely.
stuff you can do with that. And so my father, being the satirist that he was, um, and the brilliant cartoonist. Like when we talk about my dad more, like he had several strengths as a professional artist, and his cartooning skills are phenomenal. And so what he did, which was so great for me, is he wasn't drawing them fresh every time he did them. He created a whole set of assets that he would then just puzzle piece together like paper dolls.
Mhm.
So he would just, if you go back and look at some of the old strips, you'll see he reused lots of things again and again. He just had, it was like background sets, foreground sets, characters turned this way and that way, in this pose, that pose. And so now I've got paper cutouts of all the characters from the first term, and I only have to draw the new characters, which,
Right.
I still have some skills with the pen. I'm not that rusty. So I've picked up that as the first of the legacy projects. So we've already put 3 out now. I'm over on Blue Sky. So anybody that's watching, you can find studiogart.net. That's our handle over. It's Blue Sky. And we've got Trumpy over there. So that's the first thing that I'm working on now, to trying to just get that out, and continue to just make fun of the world that we're in right now. Again, regardless of policy and side or whatever, like this is just a nutball time to be an American. So this lends itself to, I think, where my father would. I said in there, over at Blue Sky, he'd be turning in his grave to have to do this again. So here we are, and I'm helping to put that out. So that's the
Just,
one of the examples of the things where I'm picking up projects and
just let me
trying
interrupt
to
here
keep his
and
legacy.
mention the Studio G website is still up, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it is, and I would send people over there. It's been a year since he's passed. I haven't updated it.
Oh,
I was just in there this morning looking at it, saying I need to update his page, and I still have that emotional barrier. So I haven't updated it. If anyone goes by studiogart.net, it's there. Our pages are there. It's a little outdated, and you're welcome to come by and see it. We'd love to have the
but
traffic and
people will be
whatever.
seeing
But
this video somewhere down the road as well, right? So
okay, well maybe I've rushed since this chat, and I've put up the more of the memorial kind of thing, and how we want to uh, share everything that my dad had done with a world that maybe isn't as familiar with him. He was he never hit fame. He always had notoriety,
yeah.
and it's interesting. He
And he
knew
won an
everybody.
Eisner Award for Best New Artist at what, the age of 40 or something
Yeah,
like that?
exactly. Oh, yeah. Let's talk about this for a minute. I think this is great. This is a great little encapsulation of my father. So he went to a professional commercial illustration school in Cincinnati, basically in the old days where they beat the art into you. So he learned skills the truly hard manual way. And so he ended up as a cartoonist, as an illustrator, all through the 70s. He worked in Cincinnati at the newspaper and at Channel 9, doing all sorts of cartoons all over the place. He was a cartoonist primarily. And by the end of the 70s, his commercial illustration career is growing. He moves us out to California, and he through the 80s is just everything. He did all sorts of commercial illustration, from magazine layouts and design, very low budget B movie, 80s B movie schlock posters and VHS boxes and all these things. So he did everything.
He had
but
his
he'd
own
always
basement studio. I remember
yeah.
visiting.
Yeah, we'll get to that. So he always was at heart a comic book fan. His collection goes back to his childhood. So I grew up reading his collection of books from the 40s, the latest 40s, but the 50s, the 60s. I saw the entire Silver Age born in his comic book collection. I read all that stuff from the time before I was even born. And so he was always there. And so by the time he gets to the mid 80s, late 80s, he's working in somewhere in Hollywood, some apartment building, but in the basement, which this is an old building because in LA, you don't have basements. So it's in this weird cave of a basement in this apartment building that he was helping to manage. That's how he kind of paid for the rent. He managed the building and then he got to work there. And he ended up working in comics for a kung fu magazine out of Texas that had him do one of the strips. They were doing all these kung fu strips, and he ended up getting a strip in there, and that led to doing a couple strips. And then he became sort of the
They
art.
they actually
And
advertised for an artist,
yeah,
right? Right. And your dad saw that advertisement, sent them samples,
yep.
and his work was so much better than anybody else who appeared in that, yeah, that, yeah, what was it? Tales of the Kung Fu Warriors or something
There's
like
Tales
that.
of the Kung Fu Warriors. Then there was also the Robo Warriors books. There was another one in there. The like Ninja Warriors was one. Yeah, there's a whole bunch that came out of that, and he ended up becoming the art director there. And it's funny. The art talent they got were young people who were fans of kung fu stuff, and they were comic geeks like we all are, and so it's just that he was further in his career. He was much older and more refined in school than a lot of the artists that were working there. And he helped bring an elevation to all of their work, like
Yes.
just as a mentor, as an art director, which is great. So he was still friends with many of them up until his passing, which I think is a testament to, his skill as being a mentor and a coach and a cheerleader for professionals. He knew everybody. Everybody knew him. He went to all the cons. It was just truly a great way to grow up in my late teens and then through my 20s and stuff when he hit comics. So this is, I don't know, 87 is I think when the very first thing started, but by 88,
That
he'd
sounds
already created the core Studio G characters. We had the Reiki Warriors and
Reiki
Murciélaga
Warriors.
was in
Yeah.
there, Sifu. They were all there by 88, 89, solidified in those Kung Fu books.
Yes, absolutely. I first met him. He was recommended to us as a potential artist for our illustrated fantasy science fiction magazine,
Oh.
fantasy book. So, I made an appointment, went to see him, was a bit surprised to find him wandering around his studio without any clothes on. And other
That's funny.
people have shared the same story. Uh, but anyway, he showed me some of the comic book work he'd done. And, when I started doing comic books under the Heroic Comics imprint, right? Your dad was one of the first people I thought of. And at that time, the Kung Fu magazine no longer existed,
Right.
but I loved those characters. So I suggested to Rick, let's bring him back. Let's start with the She-Bat, who's definitely the most interesting, of the characters that he
My
created,
favorite.
to my
My
mind.
favorite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we scheduled a couple of issues of Murciélaga She-Bat, reprint book, one where she met one of our characters,
Mhm.
to bring her into the universe.
Tigress, right?
Yes, yeah, that was
Yeah.
in issue 2.
Yes.
And then, you know, Daerick cut a deal with some other publisher, and the Reiki Warriors, the first issue of that, and the third issue of She-Bat came through them. He had
Yes.
wonderful plans. There were like 7 or 8 comic books that he wanted to
Oh
do.
yeah. I've got the
But,
script still. I found
oh, we should do those. But
them.
that company didn't work out. They,
Yeah, and it's funny. I was at that point in college and getting started in my life there. So I was unaware of some of this, what exactly happened. I know everything you're saying. I know the big beats. I don't know the conversations. I don't know if there was drama or what happened. That I don't know. But I do know,
there
I
was no drama
remember
between us. Daerick just
yeah,
had this deal that he thought was really great. And I said, okay, you got a great deal? Go
awesome.
for it. Absolutely.
Got it.
I'll
I
be here
just
if
I
you
don't
need
know
me.
how that fell apart though. Something fell
Yeah,
apart and it sounded like there was a little whatever, but that's history. But I do remember like She-Bat 3 suddenly being through, I think it was revolutionary at the time.
that sounds right.
Um,
Yeah.
and uh and that was great because there was a partnership there with writer Martin Powell. who I'm still in touch with today, who's awesome. He's great. And he was a collaborator with my dad on several projects through the 90s that they were trying to build up that didn't see the light of day. Like, all the small press companies, we all have all these big dreams and projects that just don't quite make it,
Yeah, like Buck Naked
Buck
and
naked.
what was
Well,
the guy? What was the guy with the tartan? What was
yeah,
his
that was I'm talking about Blackwatch. So Martin
Blackwatch?
Powell is
Yeah,
one of the creators and writers of Blackwatch, and so yeah, that was one. And these were all things that we were promoting. There was ads going out, like we were getting ready to go, and then it just there was no backing,
yeah.
no publisher. It didn't happen. So Blackwatch was one. Buck Naked
The
was one.
gin,
Huh?
the gin. There was a
Yes,
gin
the
series.
gin was another one. The Mythfits, and then we had my dad was able to get the license rights to do the Birds. Going back to Alfred Hitchcock, he and Martin Powell were going to work on the Birds, and that was getting to the point of getting prepped, but it again didn't congeal. It just couldn't quite happen. And that I saw some of the early art. It was gorgeous. It looks so good.
Still have it.
So yeah, somewhere I've got. It's funny. My dad kept everything. He wasn't a hoarder of other things, but all of his
Yeah,
art, all of his projects, it's been a year and I'm still sifting through. So I'm finding original art. I'm finding 137 copies of things that he just copied and photocopied and photocopied.
yeah.
There's just so much. So I have not found the originals for the bird stuff, but I found some really good color copies, and so I know where it was going, and I know his painting style. It was going to be a painted book like he did with Vampire Lestat and what he did with Forbidden Planet. It was going to be just gorgeous.
The last thing that he and I were working on, we had a long-term project, those black and white books.
Yes.
The we're getting color into them, right? We did get color into all the stuff that went through Heroic Publishing. We were working on getting color into the stuff from all those Tales of the Kung Fu Warrior book, and we got
Mhm.
pretty far with that. He was trying to gather up, artwork, original artwork, because he wasn't happy with the scans that we'd done of the comic books.
Hmm.
And I don't think he got very far with that, finding all of that old artwork from those stories.
Okay.
But we should.
I've not found those yet, but now that I know this, as I go back to continue to sift through, if I find those originals, I will absolutely call you up and we'll work on that.
Okay, because I one of my goals was to get color into all of that stuff, all of that comic book stuff that Rick
Right.
did, so that he would be able, to do collections of that material, which we have one coming up. In fact, we're doing a She-Bat archive through Critical Blast Publishing that will contain all of the published She-Bat stories that were in issues 8 through 19, plus the She-Bat special and the Reiki Warrior special. All of that
Okay.
material now in color will be included in that archive, along with all of the artistic pieces that he did as frontispieces for those
Oh,
books.
yes.
Yeah, those were gorgeous, gorgeous.
Yeah. That's the interesting about my father. Interesting thing is he because I don't well, you know him very well, but for the audience watching, so he struggled with a pretty severe ADHD diagnosis and didn't know it for he was well into his 60s before he got that actually diagnosed. Um, and part of that lends itself to the repetitiveness of going over and over again, sequential art, panel to panel to panel, got tiresome for him. So he was constantly trying to get new distractions so he can come back to it and be fresh. But when it came to these single shots, like the covers or the promo work and stuff, he could knock those out. And those were because they were contained projects and they didn't go on and on. He was able to focus on those and really put in the love. And not to dismiss any of his comic book sequential work, but that's where he struggled. Like that was as a professional, I would have conversations. We'd talk about it. His attention was constantly broken, and he'd have to come back and restart where he was at and find that love or that vibe. And so he struggled with the sequential nature and the continuous nature of a comic book interior.
In fact, toward the end there, he just didn't even want to do sequential art. Right. He,
Correct.
he told me flat out, "Yeah, I don't want to do sequential art anymore. You got posters, you've got covers, things like that. Yeah, I'd love to do those, but he just didn't want to do the stories anymore.
Right.
Um, he, I think the last thing he did may have been that Liberty Girl story that he did.
Oh
And
yeah.
yeah,
I know he loved to do the covers for you. I remember seeing the Flare and the Liberty Girl, and he did several covers for you, and they were
Oh
just
yeah,
beautiful.
beautiful stuff. Beautiful stuff. I
Yes.
particularly like the one where Flair is flying up in the air,
Yeah.
right, and the glow around her is in the shape of a penis. You remember that cover?
Yeah, I do.
I
And
did not. I did not see it until Rick pointed it out to me. Is oh yeah,
he was very, it's funny, he was very cheeky, and he loved the little off-color things he could slip into places, and
yeah,
he did his best to throw that in there wherever he could, just all sorts of just, risque little nods. Yes. And so that sounds like something my dad would do. Yes.
yeah. It's nobody sees that. I mean, once
Well,
it's
they will
pointed
now.
out
They're
to
all going to
you,
go back and look for that.
once it's pointed out to you, you cannot not see it anymore. But until it's pointed out, you just don't see it. Yeah. So
Oh, that's hilarious. I'm now going to go back and redouble check that and say, like, yes, there it is. Because
Flair, what issue was that? That was Flair number 15, I think.
that sounds about right. It was earlier on, but it wasn't. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
I know the cover you talk about, so I know exactly which one to go look for.
Okay. All righty. Now, you were actually going to be doing some stuff with the She-Bat at one point, I recall.
Right. Pardon me. So She-Bat is, I think, of all the characters, of all the properties that Studio G has, and I do want to do something with a little bit with everybody, but She-Bat is the one that has the most history, the richest backstory, the most to work with, and the one that my dad and I collaborated on the most. And my sister, like she helped with some of the story writing, I helped with some of the stories. I did some of the artwork and covers through some of the issues that we put out. And there's a legacy. Like I think with She-Bat, there's a sentimental family legacy with this particular character that I've talked to all of the family, and we want to do something with her. So what it is, I'm not entirely sure yet. We don't have a project, but I do think. Well, I know she has a future. It's just a matter of what do we want to do? How do we want to approach it? It's a digital world now. It's a lot easier to put out publications, certainly in a digital format, without having to go through the pain of a small press project in the mid 90s. Like that was an
Yeah.
expensive endeavor, right? So there's certainly room for a small little house like ourselves to put something together. It's a question of time and just the general resources to be able to focus on it. So I don't have anything I can describe and say we're going to do this, that, and the other, but there's a future, and we're talking through what does that look like? How do we utilize her? What does a 2020s, a 2030s She-Bat story look like, rather than going back and revisiting the 90s and the 2000s? Like she needs a future, and that's what we're trying to build.
Ah, very good. I'm looking forward to seeing
Thank you, thank you. I'm looking forward to seeing it too.
that. The one of the things that we did, there was a crossover between the Reiki Warriors and the Robo Warriors.
Oh yes,
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 you ran
the
across a few
dinosaurs.
issues of Tales of the Kung Fu Warriors, or I guess it was Robo Warriors at that time.
Yes.
But when I was looking at that old work that your father did and figuring out how we could put color into it, that sort of jumped out at me, right? Because there's a story there. It took place during the Seoul Olympics back in the 80s, the Summer Olympics in there. And it, as I was looking at that, I was saying, okay, all of this Daerick Gröss artwork is usable, right? Except for the fact that there's a Robo Warriors character in there, right?
Right.
And the other artwork for the other half of the story was not really usable. So I discussed it with your dad, and we said, what if we substitute some members of the League of Champions in for the Robo
Hmm.
Warriors? We did that. We got Henry Martinez to work on the League of Champions part of it. Your dad
Oh
went in.
wow.
Your dad went in and cleaned up some of it. We replaced that big Robo Warriors character with Giant, right, which Henry Martinez did. And we basically published that story somewhat rewritten as Reiki Warriors League of Champions crossover in a couple of issues of League of Champions and a couple of issues of Murciélaga She-Bat. So
That's awesome. I think my dad mentioned it. I wasn't aware that it got finished. That's awesome. I
yeah,
can tell you a little background on that. So this was back in the time I hadn't left for college yet. So my sister and I are in high school, And she and I are both involved with my dad in talking about this. Like we didn't script it, but we were talking about the genesis of the story and how would it work. He just knew he wanted dinosaurs. He didn't know how to get the dinosaurs into the story. He just wanted to draw dinosaurs. And I think it was my sister that came up with the idea. So if you recall, because you were working on it, the villains are these three goofball sorcerers that don't quite get it right. Like everything they do fails. And what they were trying to do,
Hocus Pocus and Steve.
yeah, Hoodoo, Hokum, and
Oh,
Steve.
Hoodoo Hokum and Steve.
Voodoo, Hokum, and Steve. Yes. And what they were trying to do was strike out at America during this time of, the Olympics and everybody coming together. And so they wanted to find, well, how did she phrase it? I think it was ancient monsters of old striking at the heart of America. And they
Right.
got dinosaurs in Kansas, is what they got. And
This
that my
isn't
dad was
what
like,
we were
God,
planning, but it
dinosaurs.
worked.
It worked. So it was a beautiful premise, and we were teenagers. We're super proud, like they're publishing our stuff, and it's just this kung fu magazine. It's not like it's DC or Marvel, but we were so stoked as kids looking at that coming through. And then the covers, if you've seen the covers, my dad and his color pencil work
Hmm.
on these covers. So for the audience that isn't aware, my father had some very strong strength, these incredible strengths as an illustrator, and among them, his skill with a Prismacolor, doing pencil work, was probably among the greatest in human history. It was just a phenomenal skill that he had. Uh, Sometimes the underdrawing was rushed, but the pencil work was just amazing on some of his pieces. And so I remember the cover from that particular set that you mentioned back in the Robo Warrior days, and just in love with all the pencil work he did.
It was great. And we did reprint those covers on the interior of the
Oh, did you? Oh,
yeah,
great.
they're in there. So the next thing that we were going to do after we did the color stuff was to take the other crossover adventure that was in those issues of Robo Warriors, or at that point it was Tales of the Kung Fu Warriors, where once again we had the Reiki Warriors teaming up with characters from other parts, other strips, and we were going to do the same thing. We were going to figure out how to get. We hadn't actually got to the point where we figured out how to do it yet, but we were going to replace them again with League of Champions people and have another, Reiki Warriors crossover,
How
which
fun.
I would like to do at some point, but there are other things to
Well,
worry about.
indeed. And something you and I could work on is whether we can use old material or not. Studio G would be happy to talk about how do we do some of these crossover, things to keep that going. I think a future project would be wonderful to work on.
We also, one of my nephews is a college professor, and he did some Spanish translations of a bunch of your dad's story. And that was at the time your dad got sick, right? So
Yeah.
I don't think well, I don't know, he didn't know Spanish, so he
Oh no,
couldn't have
yeah,
proofread.
no,
Yeah.
no.
But we were going to, re-letter and publish those, which we can still do. And you
Mhm.
gave your approval for this.
I
So there
did.
will be, in addition to the big She-Bat archive, there will also be a somewhat smaller collection of She-Bat stories translated into Spanish.
This is something we've always, and this is why it was such an easy thing to say yes. Like we wanted to do, we actually got to a point where we did publish in the early 2000s a 3-issue limited series, a flip book, where you would read one story in English and then flip it over and read a different story in Spanish. But then across the 3 issues, you got all 3 stories,
Right.
both English and Spanish. And it was gimmicky and it was fun and we enjoyed it. We thought it was a lot of fun to put together, but we definitely love the idea of being able to be bilingual in our publications. And so when you had suggested this to me, it was an easy yes, like absolutely, and we greatly appreciate your interest in getting that done. So thank you so much. Super excited for that.
Well, it's not done yet, but we are going to do it. So,
Well, I have faith it will be done wonderfully, and I'm super excited to see how that turns out.
all righty. Um, what else should we talk about? We're running close to our usual 40 minutes or so.
Okay,
Um, you, you,
me.
yes, you.
Okay.
your own projects. You must have something that's not related to your dad that you would like to do on the artistic side.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, sure. And again, slow burning projects. I'm sure many artists who also work jobs with small children and their families are struggling to how do I get my stuff done? I have so many projects. Some are more closer to reality than others. In a comic book sense, I had created several years ago my own set of characters. They were part of, or at least connected to the same world, but they were my set of characters. So as we move forward with the Studio G characters, some of my characters will come to life through, that fruition will come through in there. So there's some of that. And some of also is just picking up where my dad left off. So like the Trumpies, right now I'm spending time as an illustrator. And I know you said it's separate from my dad. My own projects, let me backtrack to your question. Some of my own projects too. One of the things that I've been really, slowly researching over the last couple of years is I want to write an actual like a grown up novel like a story, but it has like some of the old school 1800s books plates of art inside and do
Ah,
these. I want to hopefully gorgeous paint these really rich plates that go with various chapters. So it's an illustrated book. It is a book with graphics, but it's not a comic book graphic novel. And it's, going to pull from real mythologies of a particular culture. I don't want to go too far into some of the detail yet, but so I'm researching, doing lots of reading regarding what was history like in that area, that culture of that time. What are the actual mythological, stories from that, as opposed to the things that we've digested today as a modern era? Like, because so much of what we know today of myths of Egypt or Greece or the Norse is watered down, is tainted by comic books and movies. And so I want to get back to like, if you lived there 3,000 years ago, what was it like? What were you believing? And so that's one of the projects that I really want to see come to fruition before I end up getting to be 90 years old and never got it done. So that's one of the ones. And I'd be happy to talk to you more about it as I get to a point of here's the thing and have it presentable. It's not ready to go into
it
detail yet.
sounds extremely interesting.
It's ambitious, and that's the thing. What's taking so much time is
You
it
should
just takes so
start,
much research.
just a suggestion, start with translations of something like the Elder Edda, right?
Yeah,
The Norse mythology, and because those translations will give you a good sense of, you know,
exactly. And although that's not the culture I'm using, that's what I'm doing is I'm going back to like, to the academia where what are they reading? Like when you go to school as an archaeologist, what are the things they're reading? Like, those are the sources I'm going to. Yes, for sure.
okay,
And it's a great piece of advice. So that's how I'm trying to approach this is just to cut away all of the modern take on everything.
great. Okay, let's stop it there. There's obviously
Sure.
more that we can talk about as the She-Bat projects move further along. Let's talk again.
Absolutely.
And I will want you, when Critical Blast publishes something, they do a live podcast. So when that She-Bat volume is about to come out, we will be doing a live podcast through Critical Blast. So
Okay.
you'll need to be available for that when it's ready.
I will make myself available for that. I'm looking forward to it. Dennis,
Alrighty.
thank you.
Daerick, thank you very much. I want to
You as
ask
well.
everybody to like, subscribe, and share. Now, we need you. We can't grow without you. We need you to bring eyes to this. So let's call it an evening. Have a good night.
Thank you, everybody.